This is the Open Source Entrepreneur Network podcast with me, your host, John Mark Walker. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Okay, that's fine. No one needs to see me. In fact, right now I'm going to turn my video off because I suspect my network is crap. So I'm going to turn it off for now. That's okay. I'm not the star of the show anyway. So, all right. Steven, who are you and why should we care?
What, we're back to that again? You get to edit all of this stuff out. That's the joy of it. So, I'm Steve Walli, and I've been around open source business for 25 years now from an engineering perspective and from the product strategy perspective.
When you say from an engineering and product, how do you divide those things up, and what do you mean by that?
Engineering, from running the engineering team where we were building products that used a lot of open source, or we were participating in projects that were where we were contributing back to open source. So from that engineering perspective, kind of setting the policy and the ground rules there. And from the product strategy, more just ensuring that we were doing all the things correctly legally so that the product that we finally put in front of the customer was well-formed, well-tested, met the customer needs, and was perfect for them to use.
Excellent. Cool. So what, so when I wanted to invite you on here, it's really kind of to get your, I'm trying to avoid the word old, but your longevity in the
long time experience.
Experience, I think, is the word you're looking for.
Yes, experiences. Thank you. To get your sage wisdom of what has worked, what hasn't worked. The expression on your face is brilliant right now. But no, seriously. What are some of the pitfalls that you've experienced that were terrible?
So a lot of it tends to be a misunderstanding. The talk I gave most recently was called "There is no open source business model," and where the whole idea for that comes from is one of the companies. I was part of a startup back in the 90s, and we were building a product. We were using all of these wonderful buckets of collaboratively built, liberally licensed software as we were building our own product and assembling that to meet a customer's needs. And so we never thought about it as open source software because the term hadn't been coined yet. And when you look at it from that perspective, we were just a software company building a product to satisfy a problem for a customer. And if you take that approach, then from a business perspective, you don't do anything differently. The scale involved in producing, RHEL or Windows versus what we were doing is different because we didn't have millions of customers. But the actual engineering work that we were doing of the fit and finish testing, assembling the product and making sure that it actually did, solve something for a customer, that's all the same. And I think a lot of folks confuse the buckets of technology, the projects that they're investing time in, with the actual product business they're trying to build with a customer.
So open source doesn't matter. So then why bother? If it's exactly the same, what's the difference?
I didn't say that at all. You're such a journalist sometimes.
I know. I'm just leading you on. I'm trying to, because other people are going to ask that question, not me.
Leading the witness here. Yeah. No. So taking a step back.
Okay.
The engineering economics is phenomenal. When you look at the rough numbers around the Linux kernel, Red Hat as an engineering team has probably over, when they do the annual measurements of who contributes to Linux, Red Hat is probably represented 7 to 12% in every one of those surveys over the last 8 years that I think they've been doing it. And so they're constantly contributing into that collaboratively developed, liberally licensed project called Linux. But out of that, they then pull software into the Fedora project, their own distro, so they can begin to shape it to their own community's needs. And then from there, they cut a very stable product called RHEL into that. That's the product that they scale out for customers on Wall Street. So that has to be stable, that has to be tested to a different standard, and customers have a different set of expetations for money.
Here's what has always kind of confused me, and Rikki, you're a Red Hat employee, so either that makes you uniquely positioned to talk about this, or makes you so you can't talk about it. But say what you can. But okay. Why? So that makes logical sense. I guess the big question is, why is Red Hat the only company that really takes that to its logical end? From my vantage point, I don't see any other company that takes the same viewpoint of investing in upstreams and then sort of bring it down, and that whole process you just mentioned of the kind of the first cut of product management around, like, for their community, and then before that's the stepping stone until they get to kind of released product. Why is Red Hat the only one that really kind of buys into this process?
Well, I'm not going to speak to that because because I will speak about what I do on opensource.com, but I do not speak on behalf of Red Hat. And as a journalist, I would have definitely given you my 2 cents worth, but I am in a difficult spot here, and I won't speak on that officially.
Understood. Yeah, no worries.
I'm happy to take a kick at the can.
Take it away.
Kick it away.
Red Hat's been doing this a long time. They're 22 years old as a company. They've been public for 16 or 17 now. I think, again, they started the engineering department at a time before people got all wrapped up trying to define what open source is. So they've always been a part of this community where they're contributing and pulling out and contributing and pulling out. But they've also always been a company that's been focused on their customers' needs. And that goes all the way back to, Bob Young as the original CEO. It shows well when Matthew Zulik pivoted the company in when the internet bubble burst. He pivoted to where the money was and where all of the customers were starting to rack it out on server. And then you look at what Jim Whitehurst has been doing over the last 8 years. It's a company that's always been absolutely focused on its customers. So it goes back to that idea that I was saying. They're running a software company. They're doing great things for customers.
Right.
But the engineering DNA goes back to that. Let's dig into this project bucket to pull out the pieces that will shape into those products. So I think they've inherently known whether I don't know if there's any real math behind it inside the company, but I think they've inherently known how to make the different investments they need to make upstream versus product.
Right.
Because you can see the opposite happening all the time where folks overinvest upstream and they don't have the engineering dollars left to actually build a product for customers. And I think that's where a lot of small companies fail, because they didn't understand that dynamic and they were kind of caught in the lure of open source. Hey, our products will work.
Yes. Ooh, marketing. Yay.
So can we pivot here for a second, because newer companies can't do what Red Hat does because they don't have those years of experience and the track record and the groundwork already laid. So what would you say to new product or project managers? What are the common mistakes or pitfalls you're seeing, and what could they be doing, planning out 5 years to 5 or 10 years from now to still be relevant and to be successful and profitable?
You're asking John Mark, right?
No.
Either or.
I've been at Meadfield startups. I can tell you many things that have gone wrong in my past. From everything from thinking open source was a marketing play to not understanding the dynamics of upstream versus product, of thinking that their upstream was a product, or thinking that it was their free product, their freemium product that they would give away they could upsell. Not understanding community dynamics, or taking in information from their community to fill in, I guess, the gaps for their product requirements gathering and how they actually serve customers. But Rikki, I was actually curious. I mean, being at opensource.com, you've been on opensource.com for a couple of years now. I'm curious, like, kind of what changes you're seeing in open source development, and what what you're seeing happen there, because I would think that as people get more knowledgeable, the types of questions or conversations have been shifting.
I guess there's two things here. For development, I'm seeing everyone is finally recognizing that it's a better way to develop, and it makes business sense to develop in the open, and that the proprietary model doesn't work like it did in the past. It's not, it doesn't make financial sense, from being more secure, or from a marketing standpoint, even, being more open allows people to actually use the product and improve on it. And help you, but then from a business perspective, one thing I'm still seeing that is fascinating to me, that so many startups, their business model seems to become acquired by another company. And so I'm wondering, what do you do if that's not your actual plan, or if that is your plan? To me, that just seems like a bad plan. But I'm not trying to create a startup.
Revenue and growth.
Yeah, so I'm still I'm wondering. I'm not really hearing a lot of discussion about innovative, more forward thinking on what's your plan if you're not trying to just be acquired, or to be somewhat open, but not totally open.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say that the thing I've been a party to a number of startups. I was a founder in a couple. I've joined a couple. The ones that worked were companies that were always focused on the customer. And you have to run a business. That's why I keep saying there is no open source business model. You have to step away from that for a moment. If you want to talk about successful companies and startups that get across that chasm and finally start to grow, I think you'll find the consistency is they were very focused on solving a customer problem. And if they were a venture-backed startup, they had enough money in bank to pivot once or twice to finally figure out what problem they're really trying to solve for the customer. So they were able to survive to get to that point.
Do you think
it's all about running a business at that point? The open source part is the engineering side.
So getting back to the kind of startup discussion, do you think investors are beginning to understand a bit more about open source dynamics? Because what I still hear when I talk to investment community people is, intellectual property is the main concern. They're not going to, donate software to a foundation because they want to maintain ownership by their startup. That's what they invested in, so to speak. They're not going to go full bore, upstream versus downstream. There's still a lot of pressure from investors. If it's, well, for one thing, I think a lot of them are reluctant to invest in open source startups, especially if there's an open source product. Maybe if that company is a SaaS or cloud service company, maybe then. But even so, an investor is, if that company wants to get involved in open source development, upstream development, the investor is going to say, why are you wasting time on this when you could be, making your service bulletproof? From an engineering standpoint, I'd love to hear the argument for why a startup, regardless of the business model, should invest in open source development.
Rikki, do you want to start on that one?
No, I'm going to let you take that one away.
I think the edge that you want to use I like putting things in different buckets.
Okay.
There's the difference between RHEL, which looks like a product that seems to be a Linux distro, versus all of the work that's happening that's being contributed by Facebook, Netflix, companies like that are offering they have a different business model and they're focused on different customers, but they're sharing the engineering costs of a lot of the tooling because they can do that with other large data centers. That's just a data center thing, not a I'm competing. Netflix and Facebook don't compete. So I think you need to separate those buckets. And if you want to talk about pure engineering and sharing talent, sharing information, open source projects, things like Chaos Monkey, are kind of that next step up than sending your folks to good conferences where they learn from each other again.
Right.
Now they're actually collaborating on the same tools. But if you take that step back over to a world where your product is the open source thing that you're working on, I think what a lot of folks fail to understand is what the real business is. And they fail to understand that businesses change over time.
Right.
You could go through the thought experiment right now. If it was easy to relicense all the third-party code inside of Windows, there would be nothing from preventing Microsoft from open sourcing all of Windows today. Because at this point, the thing that makes that operating system so bulletproof is the fact that once they lock down the code and go into the build up to the release to manufacturing, there's an enormous test matrix there of ISV third-party code and all of the hardware devices and everything else that the average company just can't compete in that space to produce the same high-quality product that you slide in the DVD and you boot and you go. So I think a lot of people look at these things and say, well, how do you make money when you're giving away the software for free? That's the wrong question. That question says that the value is the actual software, not the problem that's being solved by the software in its unique packaging. Cool. And why will SUSE always be second place to Red Hat?
Careful.
Why can Red Hat support CentOS in that community? Because clearly it's the Red Hat product given away for free. Why would they help? It's because I think the Red Hat product management team deeply understands the real solution that they built.
It took them the better part of a decade to finally get comfortable with that position. But
even backing it to the way I look at Red Hat, and again, this is an outsider's view. I've never worked for the company. Red Hat solved the problem for large businesses in a world that was starting to scale out servers in data centers. And the servers that you scaled out before then, well, Sun was the market leader with these outrageously expensive Spark servers with this expensively licensed Solaris Unix operating system. And Red Hat comes along and says, nah, it's not that expensive. It's Linux. You can move all of your infrastructure. It'll mostly work exactly the same thing, and we can rack it out on cheap Intel servers. They were never trying to be the best Linux distro. So they were never competing with the rest of the Linux distros.
Right.
They were solving a very different problem for a very particular customer, and they grew a business based on that. And that's what I mean about you got to know what business you're in.
Good
and
point.
Then you got to stay focused on your customer.
Speaking of customers, Rikki, do you see many customers popping up on opensource.com? I mean, do you see mostly kind of upstream people, or are there kind of product people too?
It's all of the above on opensource.com because we cover so many topics and are agnostic when it comes to the technologies, as long as it's open source related. So we have everything from new people who are just learning about open source to CTOs, CIOs, CEOs, kernel developers. So it's a pretty broad range.
Do they? Do you think they get? Do you think that the open? How should I phrase this? Do you think opensource.com is? I guess the question is, where does opensource.com fit on the value chain that Red Hat provides? I mean, is it really?
Well, it's a community site. It's a brand site for Red Hat, where they're able to, if you're searching for information on open source and the role open source plays in business or education or healthcare or whatever, why wouldn't you want to find it from a Red Hat site? And so that's the I think the service that they're able to provide is give a platform for the community. And then, Red Hat supports a small editorial team, and so we can work with members of different communities. Some of them work on Red Hat projects, but we try to keep it where it's 60% or more of our contributions come from people outside of Red Hat, meaning also not the editors, because we write for the site also. Just so we can have a lot of different voices. We like to hear, the last couple of years, we've been doing more with how open source is being used in business. And as far as methodologies, open source, business practices and technologies, so, and that's where we've shared a lot about how Red Hat culture fits into how we run our business also.
It seems to be a great way to keep, current with what's happening. But the other thing is, I sense that we're kind of transitioning away from, yes, you should use or participate in open source. And I think we're shifting to the question of what's the best way to consume or participate in open source communities.
Yeah, and even there, it goes back to like the question of print or digital, or vinyl or MP3 or whatever. It's however you want to do it. And so we want to make sure that that there are all these different options, and everybody's not going to agree on all of them. And there can be multiple right answers. Whatever text editor or whichever hardware helps you get your job done is going to be the best one for you, right?
Great. Cool. Well, I've been very impressed with the things you've done with that site. And how, kind of Red Hat has treated the whole process. It's actually been, I think, a really good example of, a great way to have a corporate funded community site. So,
well, thank you. I feel the same way. And that's one of the reasons why I joined the site. I had watched it from back in my journalism days and really liked what they were doing. And I think that more businesses, not just in technology, but, more companies need to be thinking about supporting community sites like this and providing information, because if I sold tires, for example, I would want, if people were going to learn about which rubber they want in their tires or whatever, I'd want them to come to my site, so they would know I'm an authority on this topic, and ultimately, hopefully they would buy from me.
Cool. All right. Awesome. All right. I would buy from you.
Thanks.
Cool. All right. All right. So I think we're coming up on the end, and then I'm going to have to run periodically, but thank you guys for taking time out on your Friday to talk to me. And once again, this has been the Open Source Entrepreneur Network. I'm John Mark Walker, and we'll do these once a week.